broad daylight, HOA authority or not, and she wanted an audience for the spectacle. From the way she strutted around giving instructions, I could tell she thought this would be her triumphant comeback, the scene that would erase her humiliation from the meeting the day before. I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, pretending to be disinterested while my cameras recorded every angle. Mark had arrived an hour earlier, parking his truck out of sight, and was crouched near the side fence with his phone ready to catch close-up shots. Linda had texted me a simple "showtime" from her window across the street, and I could almost hear her laughing from there. Karen wasted no time ordering the tow truck driver to hook up to the gate, her voice booming like a stage director preparing for opening night. She kept glancing toward the end of the street where a few curious neighbors had already gathered, drawn by the sound of chains clinking and the undeniable smell of drama. The driver, a tall man with a deep tan and a patient expression, looked less than thrilled about the job. I saw him point at the bright red private property signs, then at the cameras, but Karen waved him off with a dismissive flick of her wrist, launching into a rapid-fire explanation about how the HOA had jurisdiction here and that she would handle any legal fallout. His shrug told me he had no idea what kind of hornet's nest he was poking, but a job was a job. He attached the heavy chain to the front of my gate, revved the truck, and began to pull. The gate didn't budge. He pulled again, harder, the tires spinning slightly on the gravel, the chain straining but holding. I could see the confusion on his face. This wasn't just a gate. It was reinforced steel anchored deep into the ground, and the extra crossbar Mark and I had welded in made it as solid as a bunker door. Karen's expression shifted from smug to impatient to mildly panicked as she barked at the driver to give it more power. On the third pull, the chain snapped with a sharp crack, whipping back and denting the edge of her SUV's hood. The sound of metal striking metal rang out across the street, and a collective gasp went up from the gathering spectators. I sipped my coffee and watched Karen's mouth open and close like a fish out of water, clearly torn between outrage at the damage and the need to keep her composure in front of the crowd. It was at that moment Sheriff Daniels' familiar pickup rolled into view, slowing as he took in the scene. He parked at the curb, stepped out, and walked toward Karen with the kind of deliberate pace that told me he had every intention of enjoying this. He asked what exactly was going on, and before Karen could answer, the tow truck driver jumped in to explain that he'd been hired to remove my gate but had been assured by Karen that it was legally allowed. Daniels tilted his head toward me, and I just raised my coffee cup in silent acknowledgement. Then he turned back to Karen and asked if she'd like to see the county property records confirming the gate was entirely on my private land. She tried to wave him off, insisting this was a matter for the HOA, not the sheriff's office, but he didn't let her get far. He informed her, in a voice that carried across the driveway, that she had filed a false emergency access report to justify the removal, a charge that could carry fines or even jail time if pursued. That stopped her mid-sentence, the color draining slightly from her cheeks. The neighbors leaned in closer, hungry for every word. Daniels explained that the emergency she had cited in her complaint, a supposed medical situation requiring immediate access, had been proven false after his deputies found no such incident anywhere in the area. He let the weight of that hang in the air before adding that filing false reports was a serious matter. Karen shifted her stance, trying to recover, claiming she had misunderstood the situation and acted out of concern for the community. Daniels didn't bother hiding his skepticism, telling her that community concern didn't involve property destruction and fraudulent calls. The tow truck driver, sensing the tension, quietly began packing up his gear, clearly eager to get out of the middle of whatever this was turning into. Karen's voice grew shriller as she tried to spin the story into one about me being a dangerous recluse, hoarding land the HOA needed for public benefit. But Daniels cut her off, reminding her loudly enough for everyone to hear that private property laws were not optional. He turned to me and, with a half-smile, suggested I document everything, as if I hadn't been doing that from the start. As Karen stood there fuming, I caught Mark's eye over by the fence, and the grin on his face said it all. This wasn't just a failed attack, it was a public implosion. The neighbors began drifting away, some whispering, others chuckling openly, and I knew word of this disaster would be all over the community chat by lunch. Karen, however, wasn't ready to slink off just yet. She marched up to the gate, jabbed a finger at the spikes beneath it, and accused me of setting booby traps that endangered everyone. Daniels raised an eyebrow and calmly pointed out that the spikes were legal security devices installed entirely on my property, clearly marked with warning signs, and triggered only by someone trespassing. She sputtered about how laws should be changed to prevent aggressive fortifications in residential zones, but her voice lacked the earlier conviction. Eventually, with nothing left to salvage, she stormed back to her SUV, slammed the door hard enough to make the hood dent vibrate, and drove off in a spray of gravel. By the weekend, it became clear that Karen had no intention of licking her wounds quietly and moving on, because Saturday morning brought the kind of scene that could only have been cooked up in her head during one of her late-night HOA strategy sessions. I woke up to the sound of honking horns and muffled chanting, and when I stepped out onto the porch, coffee in hand, I found a small but determined mob of HOA members gathered in front of my gate, standing shoulder to shoulder with hastily made signs that read things like "Open the road" and "Stop the hostility." At the front, of course, was Karen, dressed in a bright red jacket like she was leading a protest for national television, holding a megaphone and barking orders to her troops. A quick scan of the crowd revealed a mix of curious neighbors, a few die-hard HOA loyalists, and at least two people I knew for a fact were only there because they liked being part of any public spectacle. It didn't take long to figure out her angle. She had chosen this weekend for her blockade because the annual County Food Festival was happening, and I had a half-dozen delivery trucks scheduled to bring supplies directly through my gate to a catering tent I had rented out for the event. Blocking my driveway wasn't just about making me uncomfortable. It was about disrupting my business, creating a scene, and hopefully pushing me into a confrontation she could use against me later. Karen paced back and forth in front of the gate like a general inspecting her troops, megaphone in hand, shouting about community rights and selfish land hoarding, while the others clapped and cheered. She clearly thought she had me cornered, that I would either have to back down and let them through or risk being painted as a stubborn obstacle to community happiness. What she didn't know was that I had been anticipating something like this ever since her failed gate removal stunt, and Mark and I had already put a plan in motion. 2 nights earlier, we had opened the old service road at the back of my property, a gravel path that looped in from the far side and connected directly to the festival grounds without needing to pass my front gate at all. The only reason I'd never used it for deliveries before was because it was narrow and a little overgrown, but Mark had cleared it out with his tractor in under an hour. This meant that while Karen and her blockade were congratulating themselves for stopping my festival supplies, the delivery trucks were quietly coming in from the opposite side, unloading everything right on schedule. I leaned on the porch railing and called out to Karen over the noise, asking her if she was having a good time. She swung the megaphone toward me and launched into a speech about how I was an example of greed destroying community unity, about how this symbolic blockade was a warning to all residents who thought they could ignore the HOA. I nodded along politely, pretending to be impressed, while out of the corner of my eye I saw another supply truck rumble down the service road in the distance. The beauty of the setup was that the crowd at my front gate couldn't see any of it. Their little protest was blocking an entrance no one was even using. By midday, the festival was in full swing, music and laughter drifting over the trees, and the smell of grilled food carried across the air like a taunt. Karen must have started to suspect something was off when she noticed there were no delivery trucks waiting in the road, but she kept her people in place, insisting that we were winning and the supplies had to be delayed. Around 2 o'clock, Linda texted me a photo that nearly made me choke on my coffee. A shot from inside the festival grounds showing Karen's least favorite rival from the HOA, Margaret, happily sampling barbecue ribs under my catering tent. The caption read, "She's fuming and she doesn't even know why yet." I decided it was time to pull the curtain back. I grabbed my phone, recorded a short video from my porch showing the fully stocked festival through the trees, complete with shots of people enjoying the food and drinks that had supposedly been stopped by Karen's blockade. Then I uploaded it to the neighborhood group chat with the caption, "Thanks for keeping my front gate clear, deliveries went smooth as ever." Within minutes, the protest started to crack. People glanced at their phones, exchanged confused looks, and a few quietly slipped away toward their cars. Karen tried to rally them, claiming the video was old footage, but no one seemed convinced. By 3 o'clock, there were only a handful of loyalists left, and even they looked like they were reconsidering their life choices. Karen, however, refused to admit defeat. She planted herself directly in front of the gate, megaphone still in hand, shouting about how I had cheated the spirit of the protest. I could have left it at that, but there's something about seeing her in full meltdown mode that makes it hard to resist pushing just a little further. I walked down to the gate and politely thanked her for keeping watch over my driveway all day, then casually mentioned that the sheriff was due to stop by for a quick chat about unauthorized gatherings on private property. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought she might actually throw the megaphone at me. Instead, she turned on her heel, muttering something about regrouping, and stomped toward her SUV, which she'd parked across the street like a command vehicle. By evening, the street was empty again, the only signs of the blockade being a few trampled signs and a lingering faint smell of Karen's overapplied perfume. Mark came by later with a cooler of beers, and we sat on the porch watching the sun go down, replaying the best moments of the day. He couldn't stop laughing at the fact that Karen had spent nearly 7 hours guarding an unused gate while my festival went off without a hitch, and I had to admit, it was one of the most satisfying wins yet. But even as we laughed, I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to slink away quietly after a loss, and every failed stunt seemed to make her more determined to come back swinging. The problem for her was that every swing she took gave me another opportunity to turn the tables, and I had no intention of letting up until she realized just how badly she had picked the wrong fight. It only took a few days after the failed blockade for Karen to hatch her next plan, and this time she traded the theatrics of public stunts for something she thought would cut deeper and faster: a lawsuit. I found out about it not through any formal service, but from Linda, who caught wind of it after overhearing Karen in the post office bragging to another HOA loyalist that she had locked him into a legal chokehold. By the afternoon, an envelope was taped to my gate with a very official-looking notice inside, complete with HOA letterhead and more legal jargon than substance. The short version was that they were suing me for violating what they called community harmony laws, by maintaining a gate that restricted access to what they still insisted was HOA-controlled land. Karen must have been especially proud of herself, because she had added a handwritten note at the bottom that read, "Enjoy explaining this in court." I admit, for about 30 seconds, I considered how much of a headache it would be to actually show up in front of a judge for something this ridiculous, but then I remembered that Karen was the one walking into this fight without realizing the ground she was standing on had already been pulled out from under her. The next morning, I called my lawyer, an old friend named Hank who knew the local property laws like he had written them himself. He didn't even let me finish explaining before he started chuckling, and when I finally read him the entire claim, he let out a laugh so loud it startled his dog. Hank assured me that not only did the HOA have no jurisdiction over my property, but their filing was full of statements that could easily be disproven with county records. Better yet, he said, if we played this right, we could turn the tables so hard that the HOA board might regret letting Karen lead them into this mess at all. Over the next week, we gathered every scrap of documentation, from the original land deed to aerial survey maps showing the property lines, to the correspondence from the county confirming my sole ownership of the driveway and the gate. By the time the court date arrived, I was more than ready to face her. The day of the hearing, I walked into the small county courtroom to find Karen already seated at the plaintiff's table, dressed in an outfit that